it is time to talk non-fiction. I have already posted my top 10 fiction reads of 2022, but since I love non-fiction as well, let's have a top 10 non-fiction reads that I read in 2022. Welcome back, or if you are new here, welcome. My name is Katrina and I make bookish content here on this channel every week, and then movie reviews and book to movie content here at the weekend. In the description box you will find all of my social links, including my blog and my Goodreads, where I have posted reviews of some of these books. I do find non-fiction slightly harder to review than fiction because there's less kind of plot points to talk about, and I just talk a lot about the structure or the narration of the audiobook. I think without fail, all of these I did listen to on audiobook, but I will correct myself if I am wrong on any of these as I go along. So let's start with one that I should have read not in 2022 but in 2021, and this one is The Anthropocene, reviewed by John Green. This is one of those books that I know if you asked me to, I could pick this up and reread it right now because I enjoyed it so much. It's one of those that if you had the physical book of it, you would dip into different chapters and find out about what he thought about one particular subject or another particular subject, because it is essays about individual subjects that are part of the Anthropocene, and sort of musings that he had. And in true John Green style, he is open and honest and funny and serious where he needs to be, and it was just a wonderful audiobook narrated by him. I highly recommend it. I'm sorry that it took me so long to read it, but I'm glad I read it in 2022, and that's why it made it onto my top 10. And then we have a fairly recent read, part of my non-fiction November reading. We have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This one was a bit of a surprise to me because I thought I was going to enjoy it, but I thought I might just enjoy it because it'd been hyped everywhere and I wanted to read it, and I finally had got round to reading it. But actually I enjoyed it because, again, it was an open and honest book. She is very funny, and she is very funny even when she's talking about serious subjects, because this book does tackle a lot of serious subjects. And so I really enjoyed the fact that she wasn't afraid to tackle these subjects. She wasn't afraid to be open and honest, and she doesn't just talk about her mom in a bad sense, but she realizes that the relationship that they had was not healthy. She realizes that she is in a better position now, and she realizes that she needs to get help with that relationship. And I just really enjoyed listening to this audiobook. It does definitely get serious at times, but I felt like I went on a journey with her over the course of this book, and I'm really glad I went on that journey because I really enjoyed it. So if you're kind of looking at that one and thinking, oh, well, you know, is it just the hype on social media? Is it just because she's a celebrity and that's why we, you know, need to read it? But I just thought it was a really good book in its own right, and I would have read it had she not been a celebrity. I've never seen her in anything, and so she's not really a celebrity to me. Speaking of celebrities, I read Friends, Lovers and the Awful Terrible Thing. No, The Big Terrible Thing, which was one of my most, this has done awesome things for my white balance, hasn't it? Which was one of my most anticipated books of the year. That's a little better. Let's do that way. This one was way more serious and deeper and darker than I thought it was going to be. It was quite scary at times. It was really sad at times. It was definitely not the sort of jolly jape about his film and TV career that I thought it was going to be. There was a lot in here about addiction. There was a lot in here about sort of suicidal thoughts. There was a lot in here about relationships and love and family love and friendship love that I just didn't expect to come out. And yeah, it was really good, and I'm glad that I read it. I thought, again, it was an incredibly open and honest book, and it would be quite career damaging to release this any sooner than he has done, and so I'm glad that he released it when he did, and I'm glad that I listened to it. I worry that he's not going to be around for much longer, and so I'm glad I read it when I did. And that's all I've got to say about that one. Definitely be prepared for it to be darker than you expect, though, because it definitely is. darker than you expect it to be. Then we have She's Nice Though by Mia Mercado. Essays on being bad at being good, being bad at being the good girl. I definitely preferred Mia Mercado's book that I read a couple of years ago, Gross Anatomy. However, I thought that this was an excellent non-fiction for reading in 2022. It's nice and short, it's essays. I did the audio, but if you had the physical copy, again, a bit like when I talked about John Green's book, you could pick it up and read the essays that are relevant to you and skip the essays that are not, or come back to the essays that are not. Or if you weren't listening to this audiobook in a vehicle, you could skip those essays or go through the chapters and pick up the different ones that you wanted to read as well. I think it's very easy to pick this one up and put this one down, and so it really suited me listening to this one on my commute. I really enjoyed it. Again, she's very honest but very funny at the same time, and she talks quite a bit about racism in this one as well, which I was glad. But there is one particular essay or chapter on racism that I really struggled with, and so I did find myself kind of thinking, oh, should I skip this one? I did listen to the whole thing, but there was just one in there that I just struggled with, and that's probably a me struggle and not an anyone else struggle. But if you've read this one, do let me know, and do let me know how you got on with some of those more eclectic, interesting chapters. And then we have a reread. I cheated a little bit, I did, because I reread a book this year for making a book versus movie video about it, and so it's gone on to my top 10 non-fiction reads of 2022, even though it was probably on my top 10 non-fiction reads of, I think, 2019. And this is Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. I will basically link that book versus movie video that I made up above for you and in the description box, so that you can know why I enjoyed reading this one so much. But just know the fact that a reread made it onto my top 10 of 2022. It's a solid book, and I can't wait to read the follow-up. It is definitely on my January TBR, which, if you haven't seen that one already, I will also leave that one linked up above and in the end screen for you. Then we have, this is a big square one, need to find it, here it is. We have Feeling Myself by Natalie Lee, which I basically read all in one sitting. This one is How I Shed My Shame to Find Sexual Freedom, and You Can Too. And this one is blurred by Dawn O'Porter as well, which I really respect. This one is basically exactly what it says on the cover. Natalie Lee talks openly about sort of shedding her sexual shame, and looking for sexual freedom in and out of relationships. And this is a different one for me, because I read about this book in a magazine and then immediately had to pick this book up and listen to it. It was already out in ebook and hardback, and I was waiting for it to come out in audiobook. So that was a bit tricky, because I knew I wanted to read it in audiobook. But I really enjoyed it, and it made for definitely some different non-fiction reading. But it kind of slots in with everything else I think that I've read non-fiction wise this year. And so in terms of my reading repertoire, it's definitely in there, but quite different if you're looking for something a little different from some of the other books that I've talked about on this list. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the narration, and it gave me some food for thought. Not everything on there was kind of new information to me, but definitely some food for thought on there. And then a couple of kind of sort of more pop culture type of things, a couple of longer ones as well. We have one that I read in November for Non-Fiction November, which is The Big Bang Theory, the definitive inside story of the epic hit series. Now, this one is a 21-hour audiobook. I've no idea how long the physical book of this one is, but it's going to be a hefty wait. This is going to be for somebody who is definitely a fan of the show. I don't think you would want to pick this one up if you hadn't already watched and enjoyed Big Bang Theory. I think if you've watched and not enjoyed this one, you would not enjoy it even more after having read it. This goes into some in-depth interviews with the cast. It goes into some production stories. It goes into some casting stories. It goes into some kind of stories about the the first episode that never was, and so that's quite interesting. I'd read about that one online, so it's interesting to hear it from actual writers, producers, stars of the show as well. And yeah, although it was very long, I definitely learned some new things, and it was definitely worth bearing with. But I don't think you would like this one if you're not already a fan of The Big Bang Theory, which thankfully I am. And I would highly, highly love to just sit down and rewatch The Big Bang Theory, even though I think I've rewatched it a couple of times. It's one of those that if it's on an aeroplane, I will always watch it. And I was quite gutted that it wasn't on my flight to Orlando, because having just read that book, I was like, it'll definitely be on. It's always on Delta flights. Virgin's basically Delta. It's a code share. It'll be on there. No, it was not. They didn't have any decent sitcoms. There was no Friends, no Office, no Big Bang Theory, no Parks and Rec. So instead, I listened to this audiobook. This is Have I Told You This Already?, which is by Lauren Graham of Gilmore Girls fame. This is the follow-up to her book, Talking as Fast as I Can, and this is Stories I Don't Want to Forget to Remember. So it's quite a short book. I listened to the whole thing on my flight back from Orlando, and I did quite a lot of sleeping on that flight too. So the fact that it's just it comes in around 5 hours, this audiobook, but it is narrated by her as well. And it's just nice and fun. And if you enjoyed Talking as Fast as I Can, or if you enjoyed Gilmore Girls, then absolutely you will enjoy this one. She's quite open and honest. Nothing gets too deep, nothing gets too serious, but it was nice to listen to some of her experiences of pandemic quarantine stuff and shooting Mighty Ducks and it having to be paused for quarantine and pandemic bits and pieces, and so that was quite interesting. But it doesn't go into COVID talk too much. It's definitely personal stories, personal essays and anecdotes, and you feel like she's chatting to you going, have I told you this already? And I really enjoyed it, and that's how it made it onto my top 10 of the year at the very last minute. So I think I've got 2 here that I haven't talked about so far. Let me just find them for you. Okay, we have another pop culture one. We have The Office Bffs by Angela Kinsey and Jenna Fisher. And this one is basically an extension of their Office Ladies podcast, where they talk about the Office episodes, how they met, how they became best friends, and a little bit more about their sort of personal lives as well. I really enjoyed this one because it did just feel like an extended version of their podcast. And I used to like to go and listen to their podcast and sit in the car with Ollie and eat ice cream during the pandemic and just listen to their podcast episodes. And so listening to it as one big chunk was definitely enjoyable. Do you have to be a fan of The Office to enjoy this one? You probably do. Yes, you probably have to have at least listened to their podcast if you haven't watched The Office. If you've watched The Office, you don't need to have listened to their podcast as well. But I read 2 Office-themed books this year, and this was definitely the better one out of the 2. And then finally, we have one of this year's quick reads books, which made it onto my top 10 non-fiction of 2022, which I believe also happened last year, was one of the quick reads books made it onto my top 10 non-fiction. But if you haven't seen my quick reads reading vlog, I will leave that linked in the end screen for you, or up above if I've got enough links. But this is the truncated version, the abridged version of My Name Is Why by Lemn Sissay. And this one was specially abridged for quick reads. And what I loved about this one is that it's got letters and diary entries. And so that makes it an even quicker quick reads. So it's definitely hard hitting. It's definitely heavy subject matter, especially if you've worked with children, or you're a teacher, or you're a care worker, or you've worked in the system of care in any way. I think it definitely is hard hitting, especially if you've worked in education like I do. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great that it was included in this year's quick reads. I thought it was great that it was abridged, because I wouldn't necessarily have picked this one up otherwise. And I'm really glad that I did pick this one up. And so that is why it has made it onto my top 10 of non-fiction that I read in 2022. So Did anything on my list also make your list of favourite books of the year? Have you been inspired to pick up any non-fiction based on my top 10 that I've read this year? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, do give it a thumbs up. Make sure that you are subscribed and hit that notification bell so that my future bookish content, the non-fiction that I read in 2023, lands in your subscription feed. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you with my next video.